After being reborn, Jenny made a different choice. In her previous life, she had given up everything for Damian Lu's last army enlistment slot, her youth, her future. She had stayed behind, managing the household while Damian pursued a glittering military career and a secret romance with Celestine, the woman he truly desired. Jenny endured, keeping quiet as she tried to become the wife he would eventually love. But he never did. Instead, he sent letter after letter asking for a divorce. Later, when he was discharged from the army after saving Celestine from a mine and losing his legs in the process, Jenny stayed by his side. She nursed him through his darkest days, helped him rebuild his strength, and bore his child. But even then, it wasn't enough. When their son grew up, he, too, looked down on her, saying she wasn't good enough for someone like Damian. In the end, she was pushed out of the family with nothing. This time, everything would be different. If Damian longed for Celestine so much, then Jenny would help him get her. And while he chased that old dream, she would forge her own path, her own future. She would place her hopes not in a man like Damian, but in someone real rough, quiet man from the field kitchen team. And this time, she would be the one lifting him up, encouraging him to attend the military academy, to become the commander Damian once was. It all began again in the fall of 1975. Jenny sat in the community office, staring at the director across the desk. "I've decided not to enlist," she said. "I'll stay at the textile factory." The director looked shocked. "You're giving up the last enlistment slot? You'd even be stationed with your fiancé. Isn't that what young couples dream of?" Jenny turned toward the window, where bold red slogans shouted from the walls. "One person enlists, the whole family is proud. Serve the nation. Never regret it. Dedicate your youth to the Green Barracks." She let the words sink in, then turned back, smiling faintly. "Women hold up half the sky now. The textile industry is vital for our country's development. I won't lose myself in passing infatuations. I want to dedicate my life to something real." The director blinked, then nodded, visibly moved. "With that kind of spirit, you'll be a role model for all young women." Jenny thanked him and stepped outside. The autumn air carried the sound of bicycle bells, the chatter of workers, the scent of fresh dust. Everything looked exactly as it had the first time, and yet everything felt different. She lifted her face to the setting sun and laughed. She had truly returned. She had another chance. This life she would live for herself. At home, the smell of stewed chicken drifted through the hall. She paused at the doorway, her heart tightening with memories. In the living room sat Damian, just as he'd been in their youth, sharp-eyed, serious, distant. His presence still made her pulse quicken, but now she knew better. This man had never truly loved her. He looked up and held out a document. "Jenny," he said, "I got the marriage report back from the commissar." As if it were a favor, a gift he could bestow or take away. Before he could say more, his mother entered. Cold eyes, sharp tongue. "The marriage should be postponed," she declared. "Damian is focused on his career. He doesn't need distractions." Jenny's father spoke up gently, trying to defend her. Jenny was going to enlist too. If they're both in the army, wouldn't that be ideal? "Mrs. Lu scoffed. "The army is no place for romance. Do you want Jenny to drag Damian down just because your family did the Lu family a favor once?" Her words cut deep, laced with disdain. In their eyes, Jenny had always been unworthy, a textile worker with no background, no ambition. The only reason Damian had submitted the marriage request in the first place was because Grandpa Lu insisted. Jenny saw it clearly now. Her every gesture, every word, had always been to please him, to avoid upsetting him. And still, it had never been enough. An unequal marriage like that was never going to last. Damian opened his mouth to speak, but Jenny interrupted. "Ms. Lu is right. There's no need to rush into marriage. It's a serious matter." Damian stared at her, stunned. She had never said no to him before. Not like this. In her past life, when he'd withdrawn the marriage application, she had cried and begged him to reconsider. She had offered to stay home and care for his parents, to give up her dream of enlisting. In return, he had handed the last enlistment slot to Celestine. After the marriage, Damian had been stationed in the south. He didn't let Jenny go with him. She had stayed behind, running the household, pouring love and energy into making it a warm home. But he saw her devotion as vulgar, her loyalty as clingy. Meanwhile, his heart never wavered from Celestine's radiant performer from the military art troupe. Jenny's presence only served to irritate him. He wrote often, asking for a divorce. And then came the accident. During a drill, Celestine stepped on a landmine. Damian saved her. His legs were shattered. His career as a commander was over. He refused an administrative post and retired from the military, too proud to be a burden. Jenny, though, had stayed. She had been the one to feed him, bathe him, sit beside him as he cried in frustration. And yet, when he stood again, when he regained his confidence, he still looked past her, still dreamed of Celestine, still treated Jenny as someone forgettable. But not anymore. Not in this life. Celestine, however, soon accepted the proposal of the commander's son, and that twist of fate crushed Damian. The proud, composed man I once knew spiraled into a deep depression, broken not by war, but by love. And who was left by his side? Not Celestine.
Me.
I stayed, without resentment, without expectation. I studied acupuncture on my own, hoping to ease his pain when even medicine couldn't. I became his silent strength. In the late 1980s, with the country's economic reforms unfolding, Damian left the military behind and entered the world of business. To my surprise, he thrived. His name became known, his status elevated. I thought, perhaps, after all those years of loyalty, patience, and love, he would finally see me. I believed the wait had been worth it. Until the day I walked into the hospital to care for his sick mother and saw him across the hallway, holding Celestine's hand as they went for a prenatal checkup. His gaze was so gentle, so tender, filled with a warmth he had never once shown me. That moment shattered whatever illusions I still held. He had never forgotten his childhood love. Everything I did nursing him back from despair, raising our child, managing the household through all the storms meant nothing. In his eyes, I had never been anything more than a convenient placeholder. His heart was wrapped in a cold, unreachable layer of ice, and all my years of devotion had failed to thaw it. His contempt for me only grew over time, subtle yet constant, until I became someone others avoided, a bitter woman, labeled unstable and obsessed. But it wasn't the world's judgment that destroyed me. It was my son's. One day, with disgust in his voice, he looked at me and said, "Mom, look at yourself. Do you really think you're worthy of Dad? Aunt Celestine and here the real couple. You only clung to some old debt of gratitude to keep the title of Mrs.
Lu.
That's why they could never be together. You were in the way." He didn't even invite me to his wedding. But he placed Celestine, the eternal mistress of his father, in the seat of honor, introducing her as his mother. That betrayal cut deeper than anything else. I had carried him for 10 months, endured labor, raised him alone through hardship, and yet he turned on me so easily, his words like blades tearing at the last fragile pieces of my heart. I hated him. I hated Damian. I hated myself for wasting a lifetime trying to earn a place in their hearts. This time, I won't go near Damian again. This time, I'll live for myself. When I returned from the community office, Damian was already waiting. He didn't bother with pleasantries and pulled me straight into my room, closing the door behind him. "Jenny," he started carefully, "my family just thinks we're still young. There's no rush to get married. The military district's busy. I'll reapply for the marriage certificate when I get time. Also, if we get assigned to the same unit after getting married, it might not be appropriate. Maybe you should reconsider enlisting." I smiled without anger. "No need to think it over anymore, Damian. Honestly, I never planned to enlist just to be your comrade in arms." He blinked. For a moment, he looked like he hadn't heard me right. Then he laughed, slightly mocking. "Since when did you learn to play hard to get, Jenny? I'm just saying joining the army is a serious matter. The troops are a place for romantic entanglements. His voice was calm, but I could hear the manipulation underneath. In my past life, he had said the same thing right before pressuring me to give up the enlistment slot. Also, he could secretly hand it to Celestine. And now, history repeated itself. Every excuse, every noble-sounding reason, it was all just to block me again. Just to keep that slot open for her. I was ready to end it. I wanted to tell him, right then, that I wanted to cancel the engagement. But before I could speak, a sharp knock interrupted us. His mother's voice rang through the door. "Damian, it's late. Weren't you supposed to help Celestine with her radio tonight?" Damian stiffened, gave me a vague promise to talk later, and left. He didn't look back. I watched his retreating figure disappear into the evening. I knew he wouldn't return. My parents, unaware of everything, had killed the chicken they'd saved for New Year's just to welcome him properly. My father had been up at dawn, sweeping the stone yard, cleaning until it glistened. My mother bustled around all day, wiping the old wooden table, laying out her favorite floral tablecloth, polishing the windows until they sparkled. She even dusted off the framed portrait of the leader on the wall. And still, Damian didn't stay for dinner. As long as Celestine existed, I would always be an afterthought. She had been Damian's classmate since high school, beautiful, poised, talented. A singer, a dancer. His goddess. In the past, due to family complications, Celestine couldn't enlist, even though she desperately wanted to. By the time her situation improved, the last neighborhood slot had already gone to me. That was when Damian had pushed me, cornered me, until I gave it up. And to cover the shame of it all, he agreed to marry me legally. That decision had led to the ruin of my entire life. This time, I'm handing the slot back freely. I want to see if giving it up again will really let them be together forever. 5 days. That was all that remained before Damian's leave ended. Celestine would officially join the art troupe, and the whole unit would transfer south. After that, our lives would never cross again. That night, after dinner, I slipped out of the house. I couldn't bear to see my parents' disappointment, their forced smiles. I wandered along the riverbank under the quiet moonlight. The water shimmered in the cold air. Without realizing it, I walked all the way to the edge of the military camp. My chest tightened. I remembered how it had been before when I still loved him. The camp was close to home, but Damian rarely returned. Whether it was duty or indifference, he stayed away. Every time he got leave, I would spend days preparing. I braided my hair into 2 glossy pigtails, wore my best clothes, and packed a bag with roasted sunflower seeds and handmade cakes. I thought love was giving, that if I gave enough, waited long enough, he'd turn and see me. But he never did. And this time, I would never wait again. In my past life, I saw Damian's back many times leaving for the army, walking away after arguments, disappearing without a word after every cold silence. I used to stand there, heartbroken, watching him grow smaller and smaller in the distance, hoping he would turn back just once to look at me. But he never did. And this time I wouldn't stand there hoping. I wouldn't wait for someone who had never truly chosen me. My steps were firm. My chest rose and fell with every breath, as if I could finally breathe after years of suffocating in a loveless cage. Behind me, Damian didn't chase after me. He didn't ask for an explanation or even try to hold me back. Perhaps that silence was the final answer. Perhaps deep down, we both knew it had always been one-sided. I returned home to the warmth of our modest house, where my parents were still busy preparing dishes for a celebration that would never happen. I sat quietly, watching the candlelight flicker against the chipped porcelain plates. My mother noticed my silence, but didn't press me. She simply ladled more soup into my bowl, her hands trembling slightly. My father looked up and met my gaze, and in that unspoken moment, I knew they understood. That night, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The memories of my past life replayed like a cruel film. I remembered how I had swallowed my pride, time and again, just to stay in Damian's life. How I endured being treated like an afterthought, how I let myself be humiliated, all because I thought love meant sacrifice. But now, I saw it clearly. Love was not pain. Love was not begging to be seen. Love was not shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's shadow. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I felt something rise inside me. A quiet strength. A sense of freedom. I was no longer the Jenny who waited. I was no longer the Jenny who begged. I was reborn, and this time, I would choose myself. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Word of my confrontation with Celestine and Damian had spread like wildfire. The women who had witnessed it whispered with wide eyes at the market stalls, their voices tinged with both pity and admiration. Some called me brave. Some said I'd gone mad. But I didn't care. For the first time, I walked through that alley with my back straight, not as the fiancée of a rising commander, but as a woman who had finally taken her fate into her own hands. At the factory gate, I saw a group of workers gathering, chatting in hushed tones. Among them stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with rough hands and a face weathered by sun and steam. His name was Zheng Yu, a man from the field kitchen team who always smelled faintly of smoke and firewood. In my past life, I had barely noticed him. He was just another face in the background. But I remembered now, in fragments, how kind he had been when everyone else turned away. How he once stood up for me when someone mocked my patched clothes. How his silence was never cold, just steady. That morning, Zheng Yu glanced at me as I passed. Our eyes met for just a second, but in that moment, something shifted. I saw not judgment, not pity, but quiet respect.
He didn't speak.
He didn't need to. And I found myself nodding at him, the smallest smile tugging at my lips. That day at the factory, I worked harder than ever. My fingers flew over the fabric, my feet steady on the old pedals. Sweat dripped down my neck, but my heart felt light. I was no longer waiting for someone to rescue me. I was building something with my own hands. Days passed. Damian and his unit prepared for the transfer to the south. Celestine, now officially enlisted in the art troupe, walked beside him like a newly crowned queen. But I didn't watch them anymore. I didn't flinch when their names were mentioned. I had my own plans. I began tutoring myself in the evenings, reading late into the night about textile techniques, factory management, and even public speaking. I wanted to rise, not for anyone else, but for me. My dream wasn't to be someone's wife. It was to be someone I could be proud of. One evening, as I was walking home with a stack of books, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Zheng Yu. "Heavy?" he asked simply. I shook my head, but he stepped forward anyway and took half the books from my arms. We didn't talk much, just walked in silence beneath the street lamps. But somehow, that silence felt more comforting than all the words Damian had ever said. When we reached my gate, I thanked him. He nodded and said, "You're strong." Just 2 words. But they made my heart stir. Not because they were sweet, but because they were true. Someone had finally seen Menet as fragile, not as something to be pitied but as strong. In my past life, I had clung to Damian like a drowning woman to driftwood. But this time, I would plant my own roots. I would grow. I would rise. And maybe, just maybe, love would find me not because I begged for it, but because I deserved it. My hands were trembling, soaked to the bone, and I could feel my lips beginning to turn blue. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I looked up and saw him, broad shoulders, short black hair clinging to his forehead, and a look of sincere concern in his eyes. It was the same soldier who had been chasing the pig, and in that moment, he looked like anything but an ordinary kitchen assistant. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and warm. I nodded weakly, too embarrassed to speak. He didn't press further. Instead, he took my hand gently and helped me sit upright. The pig, meanwhile, had been caught by another group of soldiers and was squealing indignantly in the background, but for a moment the world felt quiet. "You should rest for a moment before walking," he said, settling down beside me and placing the wrung-out jacket over my shoulders. I felt a sudden heat rise to my face, not from shame, but from the unfamiliar comfort of being cared for so directly. In my past life, I had always been the one giving, the one worrying, the one enduring. I couldn't remember a single time Damian had ever put a coat over me, not even when I was shivering during a snowstorm waiting for him outside the military hospital. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded again. "Name's Zhengyu. Kitchen unit." "And you?" "Jenny," I replied, voice still a little hoarse from the water. He smiled faintly. "Well, Jenny, if I had known rescuing someone from a pig chase was part of my job, I would have asked for a promotion already." I laughed, a real laugh, the first in days. For a moment, everything else faded, the bitterness, the betrayal, the humiliation. There was only the sun rising higher in the sky, and this unexpected connection with a man who didn't owe me anything, and yet still came running. We sat there a little longer, until I regained my strength. Then he offered to walk me home. I wanted to refuse, at first afraid of what people might say, but then I realized I didn't care anymore. Let them talk. I had nothing to be ashamed of. On the way, we spoke in quiet tones. He told me about growing up in the countryside, how he joined the army not for glory, but simply to earn enough to help his younger siblings go to school. There was no arrogance in his words, no entitlement, only sincerity and resilience. The kind of strength I'd never seen in Damian. When we reached the alley near my house, he paused. "I'll see you around," he said. And just like that, he turned and walked away, not waiting for praise or clinging to the moment. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was just being kind. That night, I sat by the window, looking at the moonlight cast on the floor. My wet clothes had long been washed and hung up to dry, but the memory of Zhengyu's quiet presence lingered. I realized something important. This time, I didn't want a man who stood in the spotlight while I lived in his shadow. I wanted someone who would stand beside me, who would see me, who would protect me not out of duty or debt, but simply because they cared. The next day, I went back to work as usual, but the whispers around the factory had changed. "Did you hear? Jenny from the Leaf family fell in the river yesterday. I heard a soldier jumped in to save her. Must be fate." I ignored the chatter. Let them say what they wanted. I had no time to waste. I threw myself into learning faster than ever. I memorized machine manuals, stayed late to help with maintenance, even began sketching simple designs during breaks. I had a dream now clear and sharp, like a polished mirror. I wanted to start my own workshop someday, create my own brand, something elegant yet practical, something every hardworking woman could wear with pride. And I wasn't going to wait for the world to hand me permission. Weeks passed. Damian's unit had already moved south. Celestine, of course, went with him. I hadn't heard from him since the night he climbed through my window, and honestly, I didn't expect to. Whatever bond had once existed between us had already been shattered beyond repair. One afternoon, while adjusting a faulty loom, I felt a familiar presence. I turned, and there he was, Zhengyu, holding a lunchbox. "You missed lunch," he said, placing it down beside me without fanfare. "Figured you'd forget again." I stared at him. "Why are you here?" He shrugged. "I was nearby. Thought I'd stop by." I smiled. "You're not supposed to leave your unit without permission." "Guess I'll say I was delivering military rations," he replied, deadpan. I laughed again. And just like that, we slipped into a rhythm: casual lunches, quiet walks when shifts ended, silent companionship when words felt unnecessary. He never asked about Damian. Never asked why someone like me had broken an engagement to someone like him. He never needed to. He just saw me as I was. Not a jilted fiancée, not a fallen woman. Just Jenny. One evening, as the summer heat finally began to fade, he turned to me and said, "I heard you're studying design." "Yes," I said, surprised. "I want to start something of my own." He nodded. "If you ever need help, say, a delivery guy or someone to lift the heavy stuff, I'm your man." My heart skipped. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that maybe this was the beginning of something new. Not a grand romance. Not a fairy tale. But something real. Something honest. And for the first time in both my lives, that was exactly what I needed. I stood at the threshold, facing Damian and his assistant, who stared at me as though I had dragged my dignity through the mud. The air between us was thick with disdain, not just his, but hers too, as if she'd rehearsed that smirk for days. "So you're marrying Lucas," she said with a mocking tilt of her head. "What a surprise. I thought you'd at least break things off to run into the arms of a general. But a pig butcher? Really?" Damian stood slightly behind her, arms crossed, his face a mask of arrogance and wounded pride. He wasn't here to take me back. He was here to remind me of what I'd thrown away, as if he still believed I owed him something. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. "Lucas is a soldier," I said calmly. "And he's saved my life. He's kind. He's steady. And most importantly, he's never once treated me like I was a burden." Damian's expression shifted, the corner of his mouth twitching as though he was holding back something between laughter and anger. "So, this is what you've become? A sentimental fool who throws her future away for scraps of affection." His words were sharp, meant to sting, but they didn't pierce me anymore. I took a step forward, my voice firm. "I would rather live a hard life with someone who truly sees me than live in comfort beside someone who only ever looked past me." His assistant scoffed. "You think a cook can give you a future?" I smiled faintly. "I don't need anyone to give me a future. I'm building it myself." Damian didn't respond. He turned away abruptly, brushing past me as if I were no more than air. But that was fine, because for the first time, I truly felt free. Inside the house, my mother was still sobbing quietly, my father pacing like a caged tiger. The neighbors had gathered outside again, whispering, staring, pointing. But I no longer cared. I walked through the center of it all, not as a disgraced woman, but as someone who had made a choice and stood by it. That evening, Lucas came to the house, a little hesitant, his shoulders tense. He brought a small jar of homemade preserved vegetables and a neatly folded letter of recommendation from his captain, certifying his outstanding service and character. When he saw my parents, he bowed deeply. "Uncle, Auntie, I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused. But I came here with honest intentions. I want to marry Jenny. I don't have much, but I'll spend the rest of my life making her happy." My father didn't say a word. My mother turned away, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Lucas stood there in silence, not pushing, not begging, just waiting. And something about that quiet resolve softened the edges of their anger, even if they didn't show it. A few days later, under a sky streaked with soft orange clouds, Lucas and I registered our marriage. No ceremony, no guests, no red envelopes or firecrackers. Just two names written in black ink on an official page, and a promise spoken with our eyes. Life didn't suddenly become easier. We didn't magically become rich or move into a big house. But every day, Lucas would cook for me after work, setting aside the best ingredients for our tiny dinner table. On cold nights, he'd wrap my hands in his, warming them with quiet tenderness. And when I fell asleep late at night, exhausted from work, I'd often wake to find him still ironing his uniform by the oil lamp, careful not to disturb me. He never complained. He never shouted. He just stayed. And slowly, the wounds left by Damian began to heal. One afternoon, months later, I passed by a local tailor shop and saw an ad for a textile innovation contest sponsored by a reform committee in the province. The winner would receive a seed investment to start a small workshop. I took a deep breath, walked inside, and asked for the application form. That night, I told Lucas. He listened carefully, nodded, and said, "Let's do it. I'll help however I can." Over the next few weeks, we worked late into the nights, him washing fabrics, me sketching patterns, sewing samples, refining designs. I submitted 3 designs. One was a multi-purpose work jacket for women, another was a lightweight fabric ideal for humid climates, and the third a school uniform redesigned for girls that was both functional and elegant. When the results came in, I had won second place. Enough to start my own small operation. The day I opened my workshop, Lucas stood beside me, holding a box of simple pastries he had made himself. "For luck," he said with a grin. I took his hand, smiling so wide it hurt. We had nothing at first, but we had each other. Word of our success spread quickly, especially since many believed I was just the girl who walked away from a commander and fell into poverty. The same neighbors who once whispered now came asking for custom workwear. Even Mrs. Wang, the one who had accused me of being indecent, shyly requested a jacket for her niece. I served them all with grace, not for them, but for me, because I was no longer that Jenny who bent for others. I was standing tall. One afternoon, as I was adjusting measurements for a client, a black car stopped in front of the workshop. Out stepped Damian, now dressed in crisp civilian clothes, polished shoes, and a subtle air of power around him. We locked eyes through the open door. He stepped inside. "Jenny," he said, "I heard what you've done. Impressive." I nodded, not offering a seat. "Thank you." There was silence between us. Finally, he added, "Do you ever think about the life we might have had?" I met his eyes steadily. "I used to, but not anymore." He seemed to want to say more, but stopped. And then, just as quietly as he came, he turned and left. I didn't look back. I turned to the next client, took her measurements, and continued building the life I'd chosen one stitch at a time. Lucas's rise through the military ranks was steady and admirable. From the humble kitchen where he once stirred steaming pots, he now stood in military briefings, exchanging strategies with officers who had never imagined a mere cook could possess such sharp insight and discipline. His transformation was not the result of chance, but of relentless effort, late-night study sessions, and an unwavering belief that he could become more. And beside him, I too was evolving. My modest workshop, which once echoed with the sound of a single sewing machine, soon buzzed with the rhythm of half a dozen. My fingers that once trembled threading needles now moved with practiced confidence, crafting garments that people in the city began to seek out. The once small courtyard business expanded into a storefront in a narrow alley of Nancheng. Though the street was far from glamorous, each item in my store reflected hours of effort and a dream that refused to die. I named it True Thread, not for marketing, but because it represented my journey raw, real, and resilient. Every customer who walked through those doors saw not just fabric, but the soul woven into each seam. When Lucas received his first officer's insignia, he didn't celebrate with champagne or fanfare. Instead, he brought home 2 meat buns and a bottle of soy milk and told me quietly, "It's not just my achievement. It's ours." I cried that night not from sadness, but because for the first time in 2 lifetimes, someone had seen me as an equal partner. At home, our daughter was growing fast. She had his stubborn eyebrows and my sharp eyes. She liked to sit near me as I worked, playing with fabric scraps, sometimes falling asleep to the steady hum of the sewing machine. Life was hard. It was loud. It was unglamorous. But it was mine. And it was filled with warmth. In those early days of Nancheng's transformation, the air was thick with dust and ambition. Roads were bumpy, goods were scarce, but every corner was brimming with people who dared to dream. I began collaborating with local vendors, supplying work uniforms to construction crews and casual wear to street hawkers. Each small order taught me something new about taste, about demand, about people. I never forgot the long nights stitching by candlelight, nor the countless rejections I received when I first tried pitching my designs to state-run stores. But I persisted. My past had taught me how to endure. My rebirth gave me the courage to keep moving. Meanwhile, Damian, now stationed in a northern province, continued his climb as well. I heard about him through the grapevine, how he was promoted quickly, how he hosted lavish receptions, how he married someone from a political family. He was finally living the life he always wanted, and in truth, I felt no bitterness. We had each gone our separate ways. And while his path glittered with prestige, mine shone with something quieter but stronger purpose. One day, years after our wedding, Lucas returned home and sat beside me after dinner. Our daughter had gone to bed, her small hands clutching a cloth doll I had made from scraps. He looked at me, his expression serious, yet full of pride. "Jenny," he said, "they want to promote me again. This time it's a leadership role in training new recruits." but it means longer hours and more responsibility. What do you think? I reached out and took his hand, calloused and warm. I think, I said gently, you've worked so hard to get here. If this is what you want, I support you. Just promise you'll still come home to me and our daughter. He smiled. Always. And so, life marched forward. As the 1990s arrived, Nanjing changed rapidly. Dirt roads were paved. New buildings rose. Foreign brands entered. Fashion exploded, and the demand for clothing evolved beyond functionality. I adapted quickly. I began designing casé,